is here, Reese is here. Okay, we're kind of chugging along. Oh, okay. Hannah Goal, in celebration of the fact that today is the last day of the program for the summer. We'll start again in the fall. So Hannah, thank you for all that you did this year. And we look forward to starting up again September, October, whenever I'm told to do that.
Yes.
Okay. I see Dee Dee. Okay, I see. Well, I don't see Risa, but I see her name in her head. I guess that's okay. Catherine Mendelson. Risa, I don't see your body. I see your head. Okay, Risa and Gilroy. Okay. So there are, hello, everybody. Hello, good to see you all. Happy summer. It is summer. Officially, it is summer. I just picked up this morning a very interesting report on a survey of the Jewish community of Los Angeles. And just highlights, it's certainly not what we're going to focus on today, but 25% more Jewish households than there were in 1997. 25% more Jewish households.
20 years.
But nearly a third of those households are single person households.
Wow.
The demographics are changing. More Jews are moving to Los Angeles. More Jews are living in single person households. So there is growth and an interesting challenge. Young people in the survey seem more engaged, this was not expected, in Jewish life than their elders. The level of mental health needs for young adults is skyrocketing. And if there's anything that came out of this that Federation said we're shocked, it is that the number of young people needing mental health support in Los Angeles rising dramatically. Federation reported it's the first time we read a study where the future looks brighter than the past. Listen to this. Affiliation, denominations, synagogues, business models are all in decline. Will I repeat those three? Affiliation, denomination, and synagogue business models are all in decline. But Jewish life isn't in decline. It's ascending. Young people who are Jewish living in a Jewish household in almost every category are more engaged in Jewish life than older people. They consume Jewish media, talk about Jewish topics, wear Jewish symbols more, and make some version of Shabbat more. Interesting. The community has changed. In 1997, the word diversity almost didn't appear in the survey. But the new survey is all over diversity. Approximately 50% of Jewish households in LA have an immigrant or the child of an immigrant. 50%. 6% of LA Jews identify as Jews of color, but parents identify 9% of their children as Jews of color. There is more openness to recognizing Jews of color, and especially parents are doing it. And the last comment by Rabbi Farkas, the new head of Federation, LA for decades has always been a diverse community, and now it is becoming even more so. So that's just a quickie on something that came out early today. Any quick comments, Steve Miller?
Two quick questions. One is, you talked about households. How does that translate into individuals who identify as Jews? And secondly, did it comment on any change in breakdown of with which denomination people
I have
identify?
shared with you all that I have, and I'm sure that the complete report will have much more of the data. I'm a prisoner of what they said. These are the initial findings. More will come out. No reference was made to denominational preference. Others, Steve, to point out that denominations are decreasing in importance, and that is no surprise. Secondly, that synagogue business models are failing, and they have to be replaced by different models, totally different models, and that hasn't happened yet. And again, the third interesting thing is that young people tend to be more involved in Jewish life than their parents. This came as a surprise. And the last factor, which we've been talking about in all kinds of settings, that Jews of color increasing steadily increasing. So that's really all we have on that. There'll be more out, but I thought I'd share it. It talks about today, and it talks about what's going on. Moving on to the next subtopic, or if I were truly young and engaged, I say exploring the next subreddit, which I now know what it means. Don't ask, but I actually know what that means. There is a move in Israel to acknowledge and recognize the number of Ethiopian Jews who died on their way to Israel. We knew that stories existed between 79 and 90. These were the big immigration from Ethiopia. 4,000 people died. 4,000 Ethiopian Jews died in trying to get from Ethiopia to Sudan to Israel. That's a number. 4,000 died on the trip, a trip that was mainly made by foot into the Sudan until they were airlifted by Israel out of it. A leader in the Ethiopian community said this is a quote: "Who knew that the price for the journey would be so high, so hard to bear? But there are also those who will ask, who knew the level of sacrifice would be so high. Our parents didn't ask. They believed. Our grandparents didn't hesitate. They rushed to Jerusalem, hoping that they would live to see it." Ethiopian Jews coming to Israel. Up until now, you know, that there was a statement made a few years ago: if you can't name the enemy, you can't fight it. Remember hearing this? Very interesting, a kind of a thing. It's like, which group is going to be called a terrorist, which not? If you don't know it, you can't fight it. In the past, Israelis focused on the rescue effort as saving Ethiopian Jews from famine and war. Now, more honestly, more openly, the focus on the Ethiopian Aliyah is on courage, to remember the dead, and to remember that it occurred out of a desire of those people to reach and live in Israel. Factoid. Israel has 9 point whatever, 3 or 4 million people. 160,000 people of Ethiopian descent now call Israel their home. 160,000. And of those, still half were born in Ethiopia, half were born to parents who came from Ethiopia. The last item I want to say on this, it is very interesting. I had the privilege of being at Ben Gurion Airport a number of times to welcome Ethiopian Jews coming off the plane, their first steps into Israel. I represented the Jewish Agency. I was there doing this. And never to be forgotten, the process stopped. And interestingly, as of 2 weeks ago, the process has restarted. And there are hundreds and hundreds more Ethiopian Jews coming into Israel now. So what's 160,000 today could be 170, 180. We don't know what the end total would be. Sukasa. I don't hear you, Sue. I don't hear
Okay, my question is, when the Ethiopian Jews came, they were, by our standards, pretty primitive. How have they integrated into the society, and is there much anti-Black rhetoric and behavior in Israel?
Very important question. I could tell you that Risa and I were invited to a wedding of the deputy chair of the Jewish Agency's daughter. And Yaron Shavit is a very, very close friend of ours. And Yaron Shavit's daughter, the daughter of the deputy chair of the Jewish Agency, married an Ethiopian Jewish guy. And we watched the party, we watched the dancing, we watched everything else. It was, I wish I was there to eat the food. One part of my answer is Ethiopian Jews in Israel are reaching into the highest level of society. Do not believe it didn't take time from the 1980s until the 2020s, okay? They are marrying within Jewish Israeli families. They have served, are served. There are Ethiopian Jewish generals, and that's, of course, the big deal in the army. There are Ethiopian Jews serving in the Knesset. The first one I met was a guy named Shalom Molo, who was elected on the labor slate. And he was, I don't know if he was the first, but he was the first Ethiopian MK I met. And he's still around, kind of old, but he's still around now. Those are the good news. The bad news is that the absorption was not done without prejudice. We're dealing with the real world, and I will never describe to you, despite my love for Israel and all that it represents, I will never throw you a lie so you'll like Israel better. The greatest conflict that occurred in the absorption of Ethiopian Jews came from the Russian Jews. It got to be such a situation that we in the Jewish Agency had to set up Merkazei Klita absorption centers separate for Ethiopian Jews, Russian Jews. If not, they were not getting along. Now, that's in the 90s. That is moving steadily into the past. The Russians brought levels of prejudice into Israel, which were never fully, no one is going to say what I just said to you in public. It existed. It sometimes was violent. It was a problem. It is far less a problem today, and tomorrow will be even more less a problem. Problems disappear when families marry. And it just is, and they are, and they're doing well in university, and they're becoming, with all the blemishes, they're becoming Israelis.
Is it the same for the Yemenite Jews?
In the good old days, we European Jews controlled Israel. And we try to tell those Yemenite Jews and the Jews of North Africa and the Jews of Iraq and Iran that they're really not of the same level as we are. However, now that Jews, Middle Eastern Jews, North African Jews in Israel represent some 60% of the population, they're not altogether going along with that perception. So to say that at the beginning, the Jews in Israel from Eastern Europe receiving the North African and Middle Eastern Jews as refugees did to them what the Australian white settlers did to the children of the outback. Again, I'm not bragging. They kidnapped kids. They took kids from families to put them into good families where they could learn to be good Australians, good families where they would learn to be good Israelis. That lasted for maybe 10, 15 years. Not good. And Israeli Middle Eastern politicians had a very hard time getting elected. We're talking in the 80s and in the 90s, the thought that they were, because they spoke Arabic, not to be trusted, or that their culture was simply not up to our Eastern European ways. Today, a lot of this is under control. Now you have Middle Eastern Jews of, coming from North Africa, just everywhere and in every circumstance. And neither problem, the absorption of the Ethiopian Jews, the absorption of Middle Eastern Jews, neither problem is resolved, Sukasa, but I feel comfortable saying to you that things are totally headed in the right direction. I'll give you a weird example of a cultural problem. Who knew? Ethiopian Jewish kids born in Israel looking for cultural identity factors became absorbed into the rap culture of the United States. Interesting, because they felt that the complaints, anger, rage, whatever, that music expressed it for them too in a different setting. I am pleased to say that Israel is doing better than in many ways the United States is still doing. But they went through a very tough, ragged, rough, sometimes violent, sometimes real prejudice, but things are, Reese and I would go to the annual Ethiopian Jewish celebration on the Haas Promenade right behind our apartment. It wasn't as if we had to hop into a car and drive to get there. And do you know what was so great about it? No, you don't know what was so great about it. So why did I say that? What was so great about it was that up front, all the old people and the parents were listening to the Israeli political speakers. The president was there, the prime minister was there, and all the parents they're right around the front of the stage, thousands of people, great. And the kids, the young ones, were in the back listening to music, looking on their cell phones, and doing exactly what other kids would do in a similar circumstance. We were laughing. It was just so normal. And it's increasingly normal. Not finished, increasingly normal. I'm going to stop with that. Any question on the topic? This is fun stuff. I wrote down something in my next category. And because I prepare in advance, what I wrote is wrong. I wrote, first four of the formal votes to disband the Israeli government will take place today. Well, if I were retyping this, and I wasn't going to retype it, the vote has taken place today. The Israeli government has already passed the first of 4 votes to disband the government. The 5th general election in Israel will take place around October 25th. Israel has serious problems. You can't do this during the high holy days. So since Rosh Hashanah is late, it's not late. It's late according to the American calendar. Rosh Hashanah will occur in late September, followed by Yom Kippur, followed by Sukkot. So what we're going to have is October 25th as opposed to earlier. The process of closing out the government will take approximately a week. We could be wrong. It could be done by Monday, but approximately. The prime minister, Bennett, had made an agreement with Yair Lapid. Yair Lapid was the deputy prime minister and defense minister, and Bennett was prime minister. They made an agreement. One, after 2 years, they would shift if they lasted a 4-year term. But if the government collapsed, the deal was in the interregnum between the collapse of the government and the election and swearing in of the next government, the other guy would become prime minister, at least for that period of time. So Yair Lapid will be prime minister sometime next week. And the interesting thing, Bennett then becomes probably defense minister and, will take on other major jobs, and he becomes the flip prime minister. Total change. What is interesting here is that Bibi made a number of such arrangements in the past, and he always broke them 100% of the time. This time, these guys are playing it straight. And if we're talking about Israeli politics, we should say the blessings from Hanukkah, al hanisim, for the miracles that are taking place, because these guys are keeping the agreement. That means that President Biden will be meeting with Prime Minister Lapid when President Biden is in Israel in the next several weeks. Okay? I'm going to stop with this looking back. There is much more to talk about. I know there are questions. I see Steve. I see Sukasa.
I don't know what this was or where I saw it, but I thought I saw yesterday or today something that suggested that that Bibi could form a new government to take over before the election. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about, or is this something I
Of course, Steve. Do I know? Of course I know. Sukasa sent me a note this week, something about you seem to know all kinds of weird things. Okay. There is a way, if the current MKs could gather together 61 votes from the current Knesset behind a single candidate, that person would become prime minister now. That doesn't mean there wouldn't be a need for an election, but that person would become prime minister now. The odds of Bibi being able to find 61 members of Knesset who want him to be prime minister, it's less than thin. So at this point, Steve, that ain't going to happen. And we're not expecting any surprise, though, 3 or 4 days ago, that was floating out there as a maybe. I'm sorry, the other question?
That was my only question.
Okay.
My quick question was the percentage of Israelis that vote, and do they have absentee ballots?
The second question, Gilroy and I were talking about this morning. Gilroy works with the Wiesenthal Center and the Yeshiva University of LA school. And I said to him, you better watch out, because around October 23rd, a lot of your rabbis are going to be on planes headed for Israel, right? I said that. The reason I said that is no, Israel does not permit absentee ballots. I resent that. I'm a citizen, we should be able to vote. We could, no problem. We could vote just by showing up in Jerusalem. Outside of that, no absentee ballots. With the hundreds of thousands of Israelis who live in the United States, or those who were born who carry Israeli passports, this actually could be a significant shift agent in Israeli elections. Ain't nobody gonna take the risk of opening up elections now to non-residents. That's number one. And what was number two?
Percentage of voters, percentage of.
Israelis vote in the 60% level, 60, 65. It is better than the United States at many times, sometimes a little close. Since this is the fifth election, since this is, let me have the things right. This will be the fifth election in less than 4 years. You can imagine that some people are sick of it. Let me use your question as a latch to move forward. After the government decided to shut down, remember, it wasn't defeated. The government decided to shut down and go to elections. There were instant surveys conducted by every one of Israel's television channels and newspaper outlets. Everyone, if you want a good business in Israel between now and October, go into the survey business. Everybody is doing surveys about everything. Now, the good news is that the survey results are shared, with a little bit of variation. Nobody in the next election is going to get 61 seats. First of all, there will be no single party getting 61 seats, which means coalition. Number two, the breakout of potential coalition blocks is approximately the equivalent of 50-50. How much of this would make anybody happy? It's not happy. Israel is going to an election which today the country is as split as it was a year ago when this government came into being. The current government established itself with 62 seats. You understand that 62 as win and 59, you're out of business, and they dropped to 59 and therefore had to go to elections. Okay? That's what happened right now. There were 62 seats in the coalition, and there were 8 political parties in the coalition. We do not call that a stable coalition. Any departure of 3 brings the whole government down, and that's what happened in the last 3 weeks. In the coalition, there was a group called Ra'am, R-A''AM, an Israeli Arab party, for the first time entered Israel's government, entered the governing coalition. Are you all aware that this was historic? Historic. You talk about, Sukas, you talk about how did the Middle Eastern Jews do? How did the Ethiopian Jews do? How did Israeli Arabs do in the government? And for a significant period of months, they were the glue that held the government together. And guess what? They brought benefit to the Israeli Arab community because they had to be bought like everybody else had to be bought. And they entered the government to open the spigots, which they successfully did, even though they were viciously attacked by the Joint List. The Joint List are those Israeli Arabs who want to bring an end to the current Israel. But Ra'am stayed faithful to their pledge when they joined the coalition. Now, last 2 things, not finished, last 2 things. In the surveys, the party that got the most seats in the first surveys was Likud, headed by Bibi. So you see that if things go close to what the surveys showed today, Bibi heads the largest party in the new Knesset. Not large enough to govern alone, but he would be the one making the new coalition. Did that make sense to you? Polls show in Israel that Bibi has 48% support among the Israeli electorate. And this is at a time when Bibi is still in court on charges of corruption. So if you're, I never want to draw ties between what's going on in the United States and what's going on in Israel. Why would I do that to us? But if you think that getting nasty reports out of former President Trump is going to move any of his voters, you are wrong. It's not happening in Israel, and it won't happen in the United States, because those who are committed don't, I think the Talmudic phrase is, give a damn. Steve.
Are there ever any other issues on the ballot? And I assume there are more regular elections when people elect mayors and other types of officials?
Yes, and those elections are not connected to the national election. So that doesn't drive all the mayors, they don't have governors, but all the mayors and whatever people, doesn't drive them to elections. The only election is the national one for government. Okay? So there's no connection with that at all.
And there's never anything else on the ballot. They don't have referenda.
To my knowledge, when I was working, I worked the polls for the now Israeli president. I worked the polls for him. I choose winners. There was nothing else. There was nothing else. Risa, are you putting up your electronic hand? You didn't put up your electronic hand. Okay.
When we voted in Israel for the national elections, there was no ballot. It's just those pieces of paper in the box, and you pick the piece of paper and you put it in an envelope, finished. There's only the election for the party, and it isn't even for the prime minister, it's for the party. Finished.
Yes, and yes, but please don't demean the process.
I'm not going to demean the process, but the vision of a ballot, it doesn't exist in Israel.
Risa is correct. What happens is you walk into your voting booth, and there's a box it's almost like a sewing box with 10, 20 maybe little sub boxes. And each box has tickets, paper with the symbol or label of a given party on it. So Likud is a Lamed. And if you want to vote Likud and support Likud, you pull out the Lamed piece of paper, put it in an envelope, and you submit it. That's voting. You have not voted for Bibi. You voted for the party. But the party is headed by Bibi. So you know that when you vote for the party, you are voting for Bibi. However, at any time, and this is fun because it happens, the party could call its own national referendum for a change in leadership. And since you have only voted for the party, if the leadership of the party changes, the person who is the new leader is the winner going forward. Did that make sense? Israelis don't have voting machines so that no one can say that they're corrupt or, but I will tell you that those envelopes with those the petek, the little slip of paper in them are guarded like hawks. I was there representing the Labor Party. And my job was not, because you're not allowed to, what's the word? You can't campaign, thank you, for your candidate within a certain distance of the polling place, and certainly not inside it. But I'm there so that if a labor person is having trouble with registration and proof of identity, that's my job. And then when it's all over, I have to throw my body in front of traffic to make sure that all those voting envelopes are sealed and sent to the proper place.
I thought it wasn't just the person at the top. I thought there was a ranked list for each party, and you go down as far as the number of seats they want.
This is, Steve,
That's after the fact.
yeah,
That's, oh, okay, I didn't, that's what I'm
It's
asking.
after the fact, and they cheat. Now,
No, they don't cheat. That's not fair. They don't cheat. They go down the list and they skip over people in order to get the right number of women or the right number of representatives from a particular part of Israel. But the list doesn't mean anything to the person who's voting. It's completely done by, but
all that cheating.
yeah,
So-
it's not cheating. But the fun thing about the whole election is what's all over the street after the polls close.
All the extra ballots are dumped.
All the paper ballots,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
over the streets, just
Let
like
me try to contain Reese's excitement for a moment, and to say each party has internal elections. Only people eligible to vote are members of the party. So as a member of Labor, I voted for the Labor slate. And you vote for your favorite candidates on the Labor slate. This then becomes the official slate for elections. And Labor, I think I have the number here. This is very promising. Let me see. Oh, yes. Labor is polling now that it may be able to hold its current 6 seats.
Do you become a member of the party just by registering the way we do?
Easy to do. I can show you the place. It's behind the Jewish Agency building for Labor. You go, you walk in, you drink coffee, you eat cookies, you register, you leave. Easy, very easy. And they keep you forever. Okay, I want to do more, but are you with me so far? It is complicated, but it's happening. It could happen that Bibi could be overthrown. There are many people in Likud who don't want him to be number one in the party, who don't want him then to be the one reaching to become prime minister. There could be a palace revolt. In Labor, there will not be a palace revolt. In Yisrael Beitenu, which is Avigdor Lieberman, the Russian party, he operates in Israel the way Putin operates in Moscow. There will be no revolt. Avigdor Lieberman will continue to be a kingmaker in Israeli politics because his party is the party of most Russian emigres. Meretz could have a revolution. Why? Because they're slipping. And when your party slips, everyone gets upset. So there could be that. Ra'am will not have a revolution. No, most of the parties are going to be stable. Most of the parties will be stable, and that will work out just fine. Now,
Rabbi, can I
Brad, yes, hi,
interrupt?
Brad from Denver. Okay, yes.
excuse me, but I'm really confused about this whole system. I assume that you are, at the same time as you are electing prime minister, you are electing members of the Knesset. Is that correct?
Yes, that is, you're
And-
electing the party. You're not electing the prime minister, you're electing the party. The
Okay,
party
but
has a slate. If they get
so you can't,
20%, wait, if they get 20% of the vote of the country, they get 20% of the seats of the Knesset.
okay, so two questions. In terms, I thought you said, or somebody said a few minutes ago, that maybe you could choose particular individuals that you would.
No,
It's your, and so I guess, and then there is no way to split your ballot. You can't
no,
go.
no
um,
split, no
No
split.
split. And it's a single round, the election. It's not like in other European countries where there's two rounds,
Nope.
as there is in France.
And that's, of course, that gives us a great chance to have total freezing of the situation and an impossibility to function. They'll go to the vote October 25th. And the newspapers, the media will report Likud 30%, Labor 10%. That's how they report it. They're not going to say BB 10%. They're not going to do that. It'll be party. And the seats in the party are allocated by percentage of national vote received. The only ones who have absentee ballots, two categories: representatives of the Jewish agency all over the world and Israeli politicians all over the diplomats. I don't mean politicians, God forbid. Diplomats all over the world. So all the ambassadors don't have to flock back to Israel to vote. The diplomats and the Jewish agency representatives vote from where they are. And their votes, will be counted. But there's no runoff. There is, you'll see, Brad, if we get to the point, let's say November 15th, and no one can put together 61 seats to support the selection of a prime minister, then they will go back to another election. A national election from scratch and not a runoff. It doesn't come down to the top two.
So the say Likud gets 30% of the votes. Then within Likud, they choose the individuals then to represent them.
Let me try this one more time. Every national party has its own national selection process to create a list. For the larger parties, they may have a list of 35, 40 people on it. Okay? Not that they're going to win that many seats, but they could have more. They could have 50 seats. Then, when the election is over, Likud is told, guys, 30% of 120, I'm not going to answer that. I don't know what it is, but 30% of 120 yields X number of seats. That's yours. Off of your official list, those people are elected to the Knesset. And in that, they are elected in numerical order. And number one heads that party into negotiations for the forming of a government. I'm going to go on. Oh, okay, Joanne.
Yeah, question. When are the individual party elections held? How do they determine who's on their slates?
That happens all over the place, and there is no single time. There could be, remember I said that there could be a revolution? There could be enough people in the executive of a party to force the calling of election at any time. Obviously, the people at the head don't want that to happen. Doris.
I just want to say, this may be a foolish question, but who in God's name came up with that system? I mean, it's so complicated. How does the average Israeli citizen know what the heck is going on? Are they just born to that? They know what it's in their blood.
I actually have an answer partially for you because Sukasa insists that I have answers. The ultra Haredi parties have declared that the fall of this government was achieved through divine intervention. Okay, so partially I can answer you that this system is an expression of divine will. Not the way I view it, but there are people who believe that. Steve says, can a party have an election? What are you asking? I lost it.
Well, like right now, there is a government, but if a party decided to have an election, would that change who sits in the Knesset right now?
Everything is frozen now.
Okay,
Everything is frozen now.
that's my question.
One of the reasons why it's frozen is that the current party in power, the coalition, has enough dying strength to get past the scenario that you raise of Bibi attempting to form a new coalition. They will block that by holding together. They don't want anyone new coming into the mix. So it's not going to happen. Okay, now we go on. I want to point out, because a lot of people are pointing this out, that this government was probably the shortest in Israel history. Bye, Gilroy. Was probably the shortest. But ladies and gentlemen, I would like to posit that it was also a successful government. And to simply view it as collapse doesn't do it justice. They came together, and for the first time when they got in position, they passed a budget for the first time in 3 years. Government after government in Israel fell over the question of passing a budget, because if you can't adopt a budget, the government is required to fall. They passed a budget. More. They brought into being very successful negotiations about the Abraham Accords. We've talked about the Abraham Accords. This government has done a lot to bring into being real relationships between Israel and its powerful Arab neighbors. Saudi Arabia is now online to recognize Israel. Haven't done it yet, but they're online. Israeli senior diplomats and politicians are shuttling between Israel, UAE, Egypt, That's never happened before. They're making that happen. I want to point out danger. There are the equivalent of QAnon politicians in Israel. Do not be surprised. Why not? It's a democracy, and there are idiots, even Jewish idiots, everywhere. Thus, there are two people who had two different parties whose names will not be familiar to you. Write it down, pay attention. The names are strange. I give you that. Bezalel Smotrich, Smotrich. Bezalel Smotrich. And the other one is Ben Gvir. You haven't heard their names. They want to crush Arab identity in Israel. They want to absorb the full West Bank into Israel. They want to launch the rebuild or the building of the third temple in Israel. Do I have to go on?
No.
Oh, thank you very much, Sylvia. All right, I'll stop. But these people are the ones who go to the Temple Mount when the government says don't, and they demonstrate and cause riots intentionally. Their goal is to rip apart any relationship between Israel and the Arab world. They control two parties. They are ultra right wing and ultra orthodox. So, and two last thoughts just to make you feel better. These two ego-driven, wild-eyed radicals have developed a working relationship with each other, despite the fact that they had different parties. And the last happy thought is that among young Israelis on the political right, there is solid movement in their direction. So watch for things that talk about Smotrich and don't laugh because he's dangerous. And Ben Gvir, oh, I should tell you Ben Gvir's pedigree. He is of the Kahanist movement, Meir Kahana. Okay? Enough said, if you will, on that point.
Could I just ask what percentage of the electorate they got? How many seats they have?
I don't know the answer to that today. They are part of the opposition coalition headed by Bibi. When you have 3 votes that could make or break a government, they are more than important enough. More than important enough. I should also say that the ultra-Orthodox said, not only was it divine will for the government to fall, it is divine will for Rabbi Gilad Kariv, the reform rabbi in Knesset representing labor, to be expelled from Knesset because he is a blasphemer and a terrible person. Last thought, Avigdor Lieberman, I'm going to have to stop with that. There's so much more fun now. Avigdor Lieberman heading up the Yisrael Beitenu Russian party is absolutely a secular Russian Jew. Do you know the expression poking the bear in the eye? His goal in life is to poke the Haredi bear in the eye. Anything that makes Haredim angry, Lieberman supports. I once had lunch next to Lieberman in a restaurant, and that's Israel. I mean, yeah. So, hi, and you could walk up and talk. Very interesting guy. He didn't offer to pay for my lunch, but fine. Now, what did Lieberman do? He has proposed a tax on disposable plasticware. Who lives with plastic disposable lunch, dinner, silverware? Who lives with that? Anyone who keeps kosher, who wants to have a meal and throw out the dishes, who wants to eat somewhere and throw out the plastic silverware. Israel has the highest per capita consumption of plastic silverware in the world because of this. Yay! It's like having Nobel Prize winners. Yay! And Lieberman, if he gets power in the new election, the ultra-Orthodox know he's going to tax their consumption of plastic silverware. And the last thing, Lieberman has the audacity to have in his party's platform, listen to this, tax breaks for child care will be available to all families where both parents work. Do you see the bear poking? Because in the Haredi community, the father comes home, germinates a kid, and goes back to yeshiva. And the woman supports the family. That would mean that the billions of dollars in tax breaks into the Orthodox community would go away unless both parents work. If you want to be unpopular in Israel, head a rather large Russian party, which is adamantly secular. So that's the, I don't know, fun part of what's going on with the elections. We will continue Shabbos morning all through the year. We'll have the Chevra Torah. We'll continue, and we will resume these before the election. So I've tried to give you enough information to get you through until September before the election, and then we'll pick up and see how things are going. Everyone good?
Good. Thanks.
Thank you.
God bless. Love you. We'll see you on Saturday, other programs.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Okay, I'm going to sign off.
Shabbat shalom.